Hello, everyone. Welcome to my talk. So this talk is going to be about my transition from Swift to Kotlin. So in order to really get y'all to appreciate why I made this talk, first I need to tell you a little bit about me. So I have a long list here. I write and maintain a blog at krakendev.io. It gets close to 10,000 views a week. I've spoken about iOS and Swift in 3 different continents. I'm a senior iOS developer, and I have been for almost 6 years now. And I work at Twitter. Well, you see, all of this is fine and dandy, right? But I wanted more, all right? Like, who cares? No big deal. I want more. So I looked, and I searched. And this is all about, this is all through my time as an iOS developer for the past 6 years, right? And it wasn't until about a year ago that I finally found it, right? And it was really Kotlin. I always wanted to learn Android, And for many years, I always asked my managers, I was like, hey, please let me learn Android. I want to be a good mobile developer. I am a good iOS dev, and I really want to be just as good on Android, right? And about a year ago, someone in the crowd, his name is Aaron. He's sitting right there. Hello, wave to the crowd. He and Trey, also here in the crowd, my adoring fans, they introduced me to Kotlin. And I had been coding in Swift for a few years now, right? So I was like, I need to learn this language. I just took one quick look at it. I was like, this looks exactly like Swift. I'm totally cool with this. The problem is I was really scared because for a while, every single time I wanted to learn Android development, my manager would tell me this. But we need you for this project. You're a great dev, and if we lose you, we're going to fall behind. Yeah, I'm pretty sure it wasn't the fact that I was a great dev. It was just the fact that they couldn't find one in time, right? So thanks to these two. Yes, this is Aaron in his natural habitat at work, and Trey over there on the right-hand side. They finally helped me fulfill my dream of becoming an Android developer. And while I was at Capital One a year ago, it happened. I got to learn Kotlin. And because of that, it inspired this whole talk. So that being said, Halloween was a couple of days ago, right? So in the spirit of Halloween, let's play a game. As you can probably see here, I'm going to be a referee. Let's make sure that this is still on. Cool. Y'all can hear me? Cool. All right. So for the duration of this talk, and as an homage to the ever-present but good-natured tension between the iOS and Android communities, we're going to figure out in this talk which is a better language, Swift or Kotlin. So this is our scoreboard. Swift is at 0, Kotlin is at 0 as well. And, I want you guys to participate, or I want y'all to participate. If whichever language you're cheering for gets a point and they pull ahead, feel free to clap, applause, woo, yay, or boo, whatever you want. It's okay. I'm totally okay with that, just as long as you're not booing at me. All right, so first thing that you also need to know is that this is going to be heavily biased. This is based off of my experience transitioning to writing in Kotlin, and I had already been at Swift Dev for a few years. Now, the first thing that really was a marvel for me was data classes. Something super simple, maybe something y'all take for granted, right? But this is something we don't have in Swift, right? Your data classes are beautiful. You can create in one line an entire class that encapsulates a bag of data, and you can give it default values, right? And whenever you instantiate it sometime in the future, right, you can use those default values to your advantage. The closest thing we have to that in Swift are structs. And to be honest, this is literally all we can do with it. We have to initialize it this way. The minute we give it a default value, like this, right, we cannot just lop that off and create date or speakers or maybe give it a different name, right? that second line down there with the check mark, that is the valid line of code in Swift. But what I want is to be able to do this. And I can't. So, with that being said, Kotlin gets a point. That's right, that's right. All right, so now moving on. Here's another thing that I found really different between the two. Those are enums. Very simple, right? Most people know what an enum is. I hope all of you know what an enum is. And in Kotlin, this is kind of what it looks like. Let's say we're working with color spaces, right? You can basically have some sort of unique value. They're all mutually exclusive to each other. We all know this, right? But the thing that I thought was really cool in Kotlin is that you can grab every single value in that class, for, metaprogramming or whatever you want, right? And not just that, you can like print out the name, you can print out the position in that enum. Like, I love this feature. As you can probably tell, we do not have this in Swift, all right? But hold on, I have not actually told you what Swift can do with enums. I like this feature even more. In Swift, we have something called associated values, all right? Our enums are first-class types that we can do so much with, all right? And this is something that we can do that Kotlin cannot do. For each type, each mutually exclusive type in this enum, I can actually associate each value with that type. So not only can I change it from the specific kind of color space it is, I can actually associate the actual values of that color space with it. And whenever I do a switch case on the enum, this is what I can do. I can do a lot with it. I can assign each value to a named variable, whatever named variable I want. It doesn't have to be a named variable from the declaration up here, right? And not just that, I can ignore these values. I can put an underscore. They don't even have to really be a thing. I can do a lot more with enums than I can with Kotlin. In fact, I'm not kidding. I've seen a compiler for a language that a friend of mine wrote, where most of it was done with enums, the abstract syntax tree, just everything, down to expressions. Speaking of expressions, here's an example, right? Here's something that we can do with enums. We can make them recursive, right? We can associate the value of the expression. We can do stuff like sum, multiply, whatever custom operation you want to do, And I'm sure you've seen this before, because I actually took this example from Kotlin Koans. But the thing is, with Kotlin Koans, oh, by the way, this should have been your reaction when you saw what you can do with enums in Swift. But like I said, how would that look in Kotlin, right? Since I took it from Kotlin Koans, you would use sealed classes, right? I'm sure we've all seen this example. You can do this kind of thing. It's the exact same thing, but the problem is this is a class. This isn't an enum. So if we're actually comparing between enums and what you can do in Kotlin versus Swift, Swift gets the point. Oh, yeah. See, I knew there was going to be a lot of Android devs in this room. All right, so let's go ahead and move to another one, right? This is one of my personal favorites, and actually one of Trey's personal favorites too. Delegated properties and classes. This is another thing we do not have in Swift at all. Not even a little bit. I can't even replicate this functionality in Swift, all right? I'm sure you guys know, I'm sure you all know what this looks like, right? This is Cotter Knife, right? Uses delegated properties underneath the hood, and it gives you something beautiful that looks just like this, and especially coming from, I used to do a little bit of Android and Java back in the day. This is not at all what it looks like in Java. And in Swift, really, we need to create an initializer, assign it in there. Honestly, this is just a quick win for y'all, right? Kotlin gets another point. Yeah, all right. But here's another thing that Swift has that Kotlin doesn't. Tuples. Now, this is something that, okay, y'all can replicate this kind of functionality, right? This is what a tuple looks like in Swift. I can take a bag of data, an inline bag of data. I don't have to create a struct. I don't have to create a class or anything like that. I can literally just associate them together and assign them to one variable. It's really useful. You can pass it into a function. You can grab each value at each index. And really simple, but really, really useful. And we use it for a lot of things. the closest thing you can get to this in Kotlin is destructured values, right? Problem with this is that this works with data classes, and you have to instantiate an entire class just so you can associate two values inside of a variable. So that being said, Swift gets a point. I heard a woo. Who was that? Yes. All right. All right. So let's change up the pace here, right? Ease of learning. How many know both Swift and Kotlin? Cool. How many just know Swift? All right. I see a couple of people in the crowd. How many just know Kotlin? All right. So that being said, I can see a few of you might agree with me on this. Again, heavily biased opinion. But I have to give the point to Swift here. As somebody who has learned both Swift and Kotlin, I'm not kidding, it took me a while to kind of grasp a lot of these really cool, really advanced, don't get me wrong, things like I pray I could do in Swift, but it took forever. And Swift, by nature, was created for ease of learning. It was created so people can have a first language to learn whenever they're learning how to program or how to code. So I have to give that to Swift, honestly. Oh, I'm so sorry. Memory management. I'm an iOS developer. Y'all probably know who I'm giving this to. I have to say, I really like automatic reference counting as opposed to garbage collection. This is a biased opinion. I'm so sorry, but God, memory management is just so much easier in Swift. All right, let's reverse this now. Coroutines. This is super cool. God, I wish I had this in Swift. We don't have this. Our asynchronous programming is terrible. We use GCD. It's great. Don't get me wrong. Super performant, blah, 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 blah. But it looks terrible underneath. Like, when you look at the code, there's a lot of nested blocks, a lot of nested closures. You have to kind of deal with all of these things. However, in Kotlin, you have async, await. It turns asynchronous programming into something more declarative. Honestly, coroutines, just in general, is a good thing to have. Swift is going to get that soon. However, at the time of this talk, Kotlin gets a point. Yeah. All right, so let's do another one, right? We're getting into more advanced stuff here. Let's talk about true type erasure. And honestly, I can't just breeze through this like I did with the past two. This is something I have to go a little more in depth with, because for those who know both Swift and Kotlin, right, generics are very similar between the two, and for the most part, they're basically the same. You can have generic interfaces or protocols for those who only know Swift. You can have generic classes, generic functions, a bunch of different things. All of it, for the most part, is really the same. However, there's one thing that I really wish we had on Swift. Let's say we have two generic interfaces here, protocols for those who speak Swift. This is what they look like. They look basically the same. We already have Kotlin coming out ahead here because they use the same kind of API for generics that everything else does. You put the little angle brackets right by the declaration of the type. You look at this, you know it's generics, right? However, in Swift, this is not quite generics. It's called an associated type. So for every single object that conforms to this interface, it has to have that same type throughout the entire class. In this case, we have Pokemon, right? Each Pokemon has a different type. You have your ghost types, you have your grass types, fire, water. I could go on, fairy. So the thing that I really wish I could do in Swift was this. You have a Pokemon trainer who has a favorite Pokemon, and this should be just a class that you can assign to anything. You should be able to assign any Pokemon to a favorite Pokemon, to a Pokemon trainer, right? Problem is, in Swift, this won't compile. In fact, if I put angle brackets and put any in there, still won't compile. And that's the issue. We cannot do this in Swift. The closest we can get is doing some really, really complicated code that looks like this, where it's our form of type erasure, which really is just more reification of the type. What we're doing is we're creating a generic struct here, and we're basically forwarding all of the calls and variables to the underlying type, which is the Pokemon. We instantiate it with a Pokemon, and then anytime you call attack on any Pokemon type, it calls the underlying Pokemon's attack. Just boiling this down, we can finally have something like this, where it's no longer Pokemon. We have to call it any Pokemon because it's our own type now. And we have to give it a specific type of fire, right? And then finally, we can do something like this all the way here on the bottom. This sucks. Because not every Swift developer knows how to do this. In fact, I gave an entire hour-long talk on this about type erasure in Swift at AltConf last year. And it took an hour, and people still didn't understand it. But we have good old Kotlin, where you can do something like this, and you're perfectly good to go. You are set. I don't even see any curly brackets in there. You're like, whatever, right? Kotlin gets the point.
It's super effective.
It's super effective, that's right. Yes, thank you, Aaron. Thank you for that. Let's talk about another thing, interoperability. In fact, I want to know, who do you think gets the point? Thank you. Kotlin gets the point. My God, that was the easiest point I could ever give. Interoperability sucks on Swift. If you, not only do you have to really, know Objective-C, but you have to have, bridging headers, you have to expose specific things between Objective-C and Swift, and even then, you have this, y'all have a concept of platform types, right? We kind of have something like that, but it's weird, all right? I won't go very deep into that. Just know Swift loses that by a mile. All right, so let's talk about value and reference semantics. As y'all probably know, right, Kotlin is similar to Java with the way they treat their types. Except for primitive types, everything is passed by reference. Right? Your primitive types are passed by value, they're copied on assignment, whatever. I don't even know if that was right. I just know there is passed by value and passed by reference. References for everything but primitive types in Kotlin. In Swift, however, we can do pass by value. We can do pass by value on anything that we want. All right? We actually have the capability, the flexibility, the control to define which specific type we want to pass by value, which can be useful in certain situations. For example, if we were to figure out who the coolest developer in this room is, amongst three, Hector, Aaron, and Trey, right? Because this is passed by value, it gets copied into the developer's variable in the for loop, right? And I can modify that array within a for loop, which in most cases causes a crash everywhere else but Swift. So this is just a super simple thing. Let me kind of show you a little more about what Swift can do, right? Here's the difference between the two. I can pass by reference, so anything you do to person will modify the underlying value and the original value. Or I can just literally change it from a class to a struct, and I get the exact same thing, but now I get pass by value semantics. This is really cool, and something that I really missed whenever I started working in Kotlin. Because Swift gives you this flexibility, this control that I don't know. It's a really nice thing, and whenever you move from Swift to Kotlin, it's something that you really start to miss, right? And honestly, it's fine. You just kind of change your way of thinking. Maybe you change your code architecture, but in the end, going back to Swift, I was like, oh, God, this is a breath of fresh air. Thank you. So Swift gets the point. I know, right? I'm tugging at y'all's emotions here. Who's going to win? Honestly, this is really all that I have, you know? I mean, that's it. We're at a tie. But that's okay because there's one more thing. First off, we're at this awesome conference that was gracious enough to let an iOS developer like me infiltrate it. So I'm going to have to give another point to Kotlin. That's what I was looking for. It looks like Kotlin won. I know this is a bit cheesy, but as an iOS developer, to be honest, I am a little afraid of Android developers. So I didn't want like some sort of mob situation to happen because I let Swift win, or I left it at a tie. Who wants that? Somebody needs to win, right? Either way, I just want to thank you guys for bothering to listen to an iOS dev speak at an Android conference, all right? And you get all the love from me, honestly. Thank you very much for being an awesome crowd. Yes, applaud for yourselves. Thank you. And that's it. So, I don't know, do we have room for questions? Yeah? All right, cool. Oh, by the way, this is self-promotion time. Follow me on Twitter. That's my handle right there on the bottom. You can read my blog if you're interested in Swift. And I have a Twitch stream as well that I like to teach people how to do iOS for free. So by all means, check it out. It's on my Twitter. All right, so first question.
You mentioned that automatic reference counting is better than garbage collector. I don't get.
I knew this was going to happen.
I don't get how much easier anything can be than a garbage collector for a developer. Can you please elaborate?
Okay, so I've been doing iOS for a while, all right, as y'all know. I was doing iOS back when we were doing manual memory management, right, where we had to retain our references, we had to release them at the proper time. The thing between the two, right, is garbage collection, and I'm going to tell you this right now. I'm not going to pretend to know everything about Android and its ecosystem, including garbage collection. I do know one thing, though. Garbage collection is this magic thing that does things that you don't know or have control over. Automatic reference counting, however, you do. And I personally am a developer that likes a little more control over what happens with my references. So again, like I said, it was biased, but this is why I like it better. Go ahead.
Packages.
Packages. Well, you see, Swift has frameworks. I know there are differences, but I mean, yeah, packages is something that I could have included, right? But I'm just going to be very frank with y'all. I didn't know if I was going to have time enough to go through all of that and include packages as well, because I was including stuff like generics and type erasure. But if I could, I definitely would have included it. And from the very tiny memory that I have of doing development in Kotlin, I did quite enjoy packages. So you do have a good point.
What about Xcode and IntelliJ?
Oh yes, we're going to talk about IDEs here, right? So here's something that y'all need to remember. What does this talk about? It's about two languages, and not two environments. All right. I was very careful to make that distinction. Okay, very careful. But since we're being a little more informal here, right? Oh God, they're tied to me. I'm sorry. Look, Xcode is great, all right? It has a lot of really cool things that I really missed when I went to Android Studio, all right? It has playgrounds, it has different, it's really nice. It's a lot faster now, too. Problem is there's a bunch of problems with Xcode. I don't need to go into all of those. I'm sure y'all understand. Android Studio, however, see, here's the thing, right? The UX between the two IDEs is probably why I'm going to give the edge to Xcode, because I kind of understand Xcode a little better. It's a little more intuitive to me. Android Studio, God, it took forever for me to figure out where is what. I was bothering these two, like, how do I do this? How do I do that? I can't find it on my own. However, with Xcode, I could, So I'm a bit more UX UI oriented. So I'm probably gonna give the edge to Xcode, but they both have pros and cons that it's hard to choose. Go ahead.
Great talk, Hector. Since Kotlin gets compiled into bytecode and then interpreted on JVM, can you talk a little bit about the runtime performance comparison?
So this is a loaded question. Korhan was my old manager at Level Money. He is an iOS developer, and as such, what he's trying to get me to say is the performance differences between Kotlin and Swift are pretty stark. All right, y'all can look up the numbers yourself. I'm not even going to bother. Swift is faster, just because it gets compiled down to LLVM, and there's no like intermediate like JVM that it has to worry about, right? So for the most part, like, yeah, that's Swift gets the edge there.
Cool. Not pushing any way or the other, but I'm a Java dev that's like trying to learn Kotlin.
Sure.
So this is really enlightening to kind of get more contrast. Thank you for this talk, and the format is very entertaining.
Awesome, thank you.
Could you speak a little bit more about what delegates are and what advantages they provide?
So delegates where, right? Because we have delegation in Swift and we have delegation in Kotlin.
The point you gave to Kotlin.
All right, so you're talking about delegated properties and delegated classes. So one thing I can tell you is check out Kotlin Cones. Have you already checked it out? No, it is fantastic. I like learned the language in like 2 weeks just looking at that thing. I believe it's trykotlin.org/cones or something like that. You can Google it. Cones is Koans. It's a marvelous class. It really dives deep into what delegated properties and delegated classes are. Essentially, what that is you can, I hate using the same word for what it is. You can delegate, like you can offload the responsibility of specific code, right, to another class, right? And you get, for example, when you're trying to assign to a variable, right, you can assign to that variable within the class, or you can have a generic class that handles all types of variables, right? Very much like what Cotterknife does. And it's a class, it's generic, and it uses delegated properties to where essentially it will do the find view by ID, right, for each specific class that it needs to. And you can, in 2 words, by whatever, you can have this functionality applied to everywhere in your project. And it's really useful. It's a very good point of reusability with code, and just a very interesting concept whenever you start learning about it in Kotlin.
So I did the same thing you did with going from Swift to Kotlin, and I want to know if you had any advice, because I want to onboard some of the people on my team that are iOS developers on Kotlin. Do you have any advice for people that know Swift really well and want to kind of start learning Kotlin?
Again, I'm going to tell everybody the same thing. Kotlin Cones, best class I've ever taken for learning a language. It is. It's an online course. It's not even technically a course. They like give you little snippets of information about the thing that you want to learn in Kotlin, and then they give you some code and say, hey, try it out yourself. You can press a button, see if it's correct, and then they'll even show you the answer. To be honest, I would the advice I would give you for your Swift developers is to focus on delegated properties and classes. All right, learn the new things. Everything else is essentially the same. All right, it looks the exact same. They're not going to have a problem at all of transitioning, but what they think they know about generics, they don't know at all until they learn Kotlin. All right, so have them hit generics, have them hit delegated properties and classes, and just really, really look at it, because it's probably one of the more difficult things about it. And the annotations are just kind of more syntactical sugar, but also something useful.
Thank you for great talk, and thank you that the Kotlin won this competition. But I'd like to know what do you think about Kotlin native running on iOS?
About what?
About running Kotlin native on iOS.
Running Kotlin on iOS?
Not Kotlin native. Native.
Oh, Kotlin native?
Yeah.
So I actually haven't heard of that. I have heard, and it's something that actually Aaron pointed out to me. Kotlin is trying to make its debut in iOS, right? And personally, I am all for it. You know, I'm not going to be one of those that like would rather have you do the native language for the native platform. Honestly, both languages, like I said, this whole point was to outline what you can do with one that you can't do in the other. And what I personally kind of want to see one day is maybe, you know, interrupt between Kotlin and Swift, because like it's very easy to jump between the two, and to get the pros and cons of either one is a dream of mine. And would be a major step forward for, you know, cross-compatible code between platforms. You know, write once, go everywhere, instead of having some middleman, right? I'm not a big fan of like React Native or anything like that. So, all right, next question.
Hi. So I've recently started doing Swift. I'm doing Android for about more than a year. So on Kotlin, what we do is we have a let and a with, which is very much, we use it a lot. And underlying it, what it does is it uses type closures. So is there something that is equivalent in Swift?
You know, actually, that almost made it into my talk. That was something that is super useful in Kotlin that I really should have talked about. So you're talking about the let and the let closure, right? We don't have something similar to that in Swift, to be honest. If we did, it would. I mean, you could create it. Technically, you could create it. It's just it's not a first-class citizen in Swift. Kotlin just gives it to you for free, and it's awesome. But like, if you wanted that in Swift, you'd have to create it yourself. And to be honest, like, I liked it when I was in Kotlin, but it's not really necessary. You know, it does make for prettier code in certain cases, but in Swift, you start to learn a little bit different architecture, code architecture, when it comes around to stuff like that, where you don't really need additional abstractions on top of closures to get what you want. So.
What have you found are the biggest differences in the extensions functionality between the languages?
Honestly, nothing. The only difference between the extension functionality between Swift and Kotlin, so he's talking about, for who doesn't know about extensions here in Kotlin? All right, so I'll explain it just a little bit, all right? Those who raised your hands, do you know about extensions in Swift? No? All right, so extensions are a language construct that allows you to extend the functionality of a specific class or type. All right, that class has its own definition, and what you can essentially do is outside of that file, somewhere else, you can have a whole bunch of functions that get added to this. It extends that type, and that's what extensions are. And Swift and Kotlin both have that, right? The problem with Swift is that it's encapsulated in its own scope. All right, when you create an extension, everything has to go inside of there. In Kotlin, however, there's a huge difference. You can actually extend a class with one line. You don't have to keep on creating like these massive extension files just so you can extend a bit of functionality, which is actually pretty cool. I liked being able to have a file where I can look at every single extension on a type without having to bother with a bunch of curly brackets all over the place. So that's really the major difference between the two, but underneath the hood, they're doing the exact same thing.
Is there an equivalent for protocol extensions in Kotlin? Interface extension?
Oh, I'm so sorry about that. Yes, so interfaces in Kotlin can provide default values, because the thing with protocol extensions in Swift, what it is providing default values to these functions inside of the interface for those who, so y'all can understand what I'm saying. Kotlin has the exact same thing. You can actually, within the declaration of the interface, you can just provide a body to that function, and there's your default functionality for that interface.
Only within the declaration, then? Can you go outside of the declaration in an extension and add a default implementation?
I wish I could answer that for you, Ken.
I don't think so.
Yeah, I didn't think so either. I'm pretty sure it's just within the declaration.
What's your opinion on differences in exception handling in Kotlin and Swift, and maybe
Oh.
Java also?
Okay, so I may be, talking with my foot in my mouth here, but In Kotlin, it's very much the same kind of exception handling that you have with Java, right? You have your try catch. In Swift, however, this is a first-class citizen in Swift. It's part of the language. It's similar to try catch, right? It is essentially try catch, but we have like this. It's called do try catch. So you do a specific block of code, and you can have a bunch of try keywords in there, which will try to execute a line of code that can throw an exception, but you can have multiple nested without having to have multiple nested try catch blocks, which is really nice in Swift because you can actually catch every single error and conditionally do something with them. Personally, I actually quite like the exception handling in Swift better than I do in Kotlin. All right. I think it's safe to say, unless anybody has any more questions, I think we did a pretty good talk here. So, thank you very much.